Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our COVID-19 reopening update. We are very fortunate to have Vincent Esposito with Empire State Development here with us today to provide an update. There's been a lot of rapid changes here in the past couple of weeks, so we really wanted to make sure that our membership base in the business community was up to date on reopenings and have an opportunity to connect with Vinny to have questions that you may have addressed and answered. Just to give you a quick lay of the land, on your right-hand side of this screen, you should see a chat, participants, and Q&A feature. If you have questions during the presentation, please just use the Q&A feature. You can pop your questions in there. If you see a question that's similar to one you have, you can just click on that question and it moves it to the top. So it shows us that that's a popular question that many people have, and we can address the questions right in there. Vinny will go through his presentation, and then when we come out of present mode back to the floor, you'll have an opportunity to have some questions if you have one-on-one questions that you would like to ask. Vinny will set up along the side at two top people, and you can ask him your questions. And we have 10 a.m. this morning, so we'll go through the presentation and then come back into the floor mode, and then the session will end at 11 a.m. So with that, I will turn it over to me.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning. This is pretty cool software. I haven't used this one before, but I like the initial floor mode. You could see how everybody was eager to sit up at the front tables rather than in the back. So anyway, I will get started. I have a very brief presentation just to kind of give us a running start into the conversation with where things are with regards to reopening and all the factors associated with it. And then, like she said, we'll take questions up until 11 o'clock. So I'm going to share my screen and take you through it, and hopefully this will be useful. So hopefully everyone can see the presentation right now. If I can't, Laura, just jump in and interrupt if you can't, and we'll fix it. But just a few slides here to provide some context, and I really like to start off showing what is probably now a very familiar graph, which is the curve of the COVID-19 pandemic in New York State, the thing that we all worked so hard to flatten last year and continue to do now. And you really just get a sense for how this has impacted the state, with being hit the hardest of anywhere in the country early last spring, to really good results in the summertime, and then when the weather got colder, people went back indoors and had holiday celebrations until the present day. There was another surge and really a very annoyingly high but decreasing level of hospitalizations. And hospitalizations, while there are many metrics, is the most true metric when you're looking backwards at how prevalent the disease has been and the main risk associated with why we've taken such extreme measures to try to stop it. But even more important for us in this region than the statewide curve is our regional curve. And I really like to show this because it gives people a very clear idea that things are different here than they were in the state as a whole, because those numbers with that first peak last spring were so dominated by the metropolitan region downstate. Our region upstate really did a good job of flattening the curve before COVID became too prevalent last year, and really did a great job in the summer. But then what you see is how prevalent the disease was in the holiday and winter months here, significantly more so than last spring when this was new to everybody. And really just sort of shows the risk is not gone. In fact, it's been ticking up the last few weeks, despite the fact that vaccinations have increased for various reasons, whether due to the variants or whether to do with the type of activity that people are engaging in who are not protected by the vaccine. But then, I really do feel like the worst is behind us, and that is in large part, in fact, almost exclusively because not only the weather's getting better, but people have been getting vaccinated. And as of yesterday, almost half the population in the state, far more than half of the eligible population in the state of 16 years and older, has received at least one dose of the vaccine. It's even higher percentage in our region. And so we're really starting to see the impact of severe disease from COVID way down, particularly among those who are most vulnerable or most at risk based on the job or activities that they have to perform. So this is really good news, and why I'm so optimistic about where we are almost 14 months into the pandemic and moving beyond it and into more reopening than we've even seen over the last year, which I want to be the focus of our conversation today. And so New York Forward is the name that we've been using and attributing to reopening since last May, when the governor created regional control rooms and began the phased reopening of New York State beyond just the essential business activities that occurred throughout the pandemic. And this slide right here is a litany of recent reopening announcements. And I'll obviously share this presentation, and this is not everything that has happened, but this is really what's happened since the end of January, which was about a month after vaccinations started. And at the time when the last of the micro clusters in our region, the orange zone that existed in Monroe County, was removed, which was the worst of the restrictions most recently. And really, as we began to then see a cadence of reopening that talks about and shows very clearly how the state's going to continue to do this. So if you all remember back to last summer, we had a phased reopening based on the potential for risk within an activity and the essential sort of requirement of activity. We've gotten beyond that, but it's still sort of the same standards apply, and that is how risky is an activity versus how safely can we conduct it. And so you started to see things actually beginning with the Buffalo Bills playoff games, go Bills, in January, with a pilot of how to reopen activities where limited number of fans were allowed into a venue that hosts large events with specific safety guidelines, most notably at that time, testing. We've moved beyond that, so that in February, we started to see other indoor arenas reopen with the same idea. And since then, we've seen this sort of cadence, almost weekly, sometimes more than weekly, of the governor and the Department of Health announcing further loosening of those valves, the reopening valves he's been using as the analogy since last spring, based on the science, based on the numbers that allow those things to happen safely. So in March, we opened a rapid testing program, which has continued. It actually started for a lot of parts of the state even before that, in partnership with some municipalities where we're offering free rapid tests, but we're now expanding the retail paid rapid test network throughout the state. And then in the middle of March, you saw weddings and catered events allowed, which was something that really hadn't been allowed to any extent to that point, which is really the first step of realizing, okay, we're through the worst, even though the pandemic isn't gone, and we're going to start to get back to the types of events that we need and want to be able to have, obviously with restrictions in the case of weddings and catered events, up to 50% of the venue's capacity and up to 150 people indoors. Then the next week we saw in March, the indoor dining increased to 75% upstate, again, still with safety guidelines. So you still need to maintain certain levels of distancing and masking, and some restaurants can't accommodate that. So not every restaurant is back to 75%, either because of those safety guidelines or other issues like labor shortages. We saw gathering limits increase at the end of March to 100 indoor and 200 outdoor. This was a big step in terms of really freeing up the types of events that we want to be able to do, because those limits don't require vaccination status or a negative test to be shown for them to happen. They still require you, in many cases, to have and take into account different types of safety guidelines like masking and distancing. But it really allows for a lot of flexibility for a lot of different types of ways people gather and can gather safely. We then saw indoor family entertainment and amusement opened, and we saw also the launch of the Excelsior Pass, which is a new electronic passport app that I'll talk about a little bit more, which is a tool that can help make things easier as we start to look to reopen even more, and as some venues and events really want to take advantage of trying to do that in a more seamless way. Sports and recreation travel was allowed statewide at the end of March. This was also a big one that sort of hampered a lot of activity last summer, and as folks were starting to look forward to this summer, wanted to be able to go throughout the state with regards to especially youth sports, especially outdoor youth sports. On April 1st, the big change, the travel advisory, which had been in place since last spring, and New York State no longer required quarantine for domestic travel. And then we started to see types of events expand. Small arts and events up to 150 people indoor, 500 people outdoor with testing or vaccination. The curfew that was existing on a lot of businesses like casinos and pool halls and others was lifted in the beginning of April, even though there still remains a curfew for food and beverage service at those facilities or any facility that has since been opened and extended now a couple weeks ago to midnight for food and beverage like bars or restaurants and 1 a.m. for catered events. We've seen outdoor amusement open. Places like Coney Island, places like Seabreeze are going to be able to operate this year, again, with safety guidelines and restrictions. And as recently as last week, we saw capacity expand at indoor locations being museums and theaters, which is really interesting because it starts to show not only are we getting into allowing outdoor events and having guidelines for them, but we're now starting to open the veil a little bit for indoor events that occurred, much like we did for indoor dining back in February. And then starting May 1st, there are going to be a lot of types of outdoor events, particularly related to school and end of school years, graduations, proms, things like that now have their own guidance. And we're very optimistic that in the very near future, we'll have guidance specifically for outdoor fairs and festivals, running races, things like that. And I actually expect news from the governor on those things today. So you can see this is all continuing, will continue for the weeks and months to come as we get closer and closer back to normal or a new normal, whatever that might be. But I thought this was illustrative of the types of things that have happened, even though none of it's happened as fast as we all would like. It is happening, and it is happening relatively quickly in context. And we now, I think, have a much better idea as to how to do these types of activities safely. So I mentioned the Excelsior Pass. This is something that's very intriguing, even though it's become a little bit of a political football, and I'm not fully sure why, because I don't think the technology is fully understood. But this is, in essence, a tool. It's not a requirement. It's not something that everyone has to use, but it's the type of thing that many people who use their smartphone for things like an airport boarding pass or a TSA pre-check or tickets to events already might be used to using. They can now download the status of their vaccination and or any recent tests directly to their phone into a QR code that can be scanned and easily allow them access to events that they're going to need to be able to prove those things to attend in the near future. Everyone will still have the option to use their paper vaccination card or print out the results of the COVID test to get into an event. But this is something that will allow that to be happening much easier, much more quickly, and much more available. Otherwise, very similar to like the Easy Pass would allow you to before cashless tolling, get into a quicker lane and move into the throughway quicker. This should allow you to do that if and when you start attending things like a Bills game or a Yankees game or any type of event where there's going to be access that's required for you to show your vaccination status or your testing history. So if you have information about this, if you're a venue that hosts weddings or other large events, there is a companion app that allows you to do the scanning and ties directly in to prove or to demonstrate, or just like this picture shows, that it is a valid pass and not something else that's just a screenshot of something that looks like a vaccination card. And this is a nice technology that also has applicability beyond just the COVID vaccine. And New York State will be looking to eventually do things like having your hunting license on there, having your driver's license on there, any other ways in which you get information from New York State to be able to download and have those right at your fingertips on your phone. So now once we get into reopening, we also have the really big step of having passed the state budget recently. And thanks in large part to the American Rescue Plan and the federal government providing additional stimulus or relief, whatever you call it, for a whole bunch of issues. It also included local and state government assistance. And thanks to that, the state budget was able to be passed without significant cuts to programming and with additional programs to help support businesses into recovery, excuse me, beyond what the federal government has already done with things like the Paycheck Protection Program and other unemployment insurance increases for workers. We now have new state programs that will be rolling out in the coming weeks and months, like small business recovery, arts and cultural organization, restaurant resiliency, return to work tax credit, and a music and theater production tax credit. The music and theater production tax credit actually started to roll out last week with the initial details. The others will be coming very soon. And these are things that our office, the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council, the Chamber, other places will help be good sources of information for if you have questions about these types of programs and the details associated with them. And I don't know what they will be yet, but you can, we all know that there's a lot of small businesses still significantly hurting from the impacts of the pandemic and the restrictions that cause them to close in many cases, or just the lack of customer flow based on the safety precautions that everybody took. So we want to help make sure that as much as possible, as quickly as possible, these programs are getting to the businesses that need them. And so we'll be happy to help share that information or take questions on them. And then in addition to those programs just mentioned, in the budget is also funding for another round of the Regional Economic Development Council and the Consolidated Funding Application process, CFA process, for those of you who've come to know it over the last 10 years, going forward for 2021, not 2011, so that the bottom of that slide should say 2021, not 2011. But this is good news. And the other good news with this is we're going to try to move this process and the timing associated with it quicker than even in past years, so that the funding from the CFA programs can help companies, organizations sooner than later than the typical time frame of waiting till December to find out about awards, to try to, again, further fuel that recovery. But just as a reminder, because there was not much of a regional council presence in 2020, the regional council will continue to be the main advisory board for each region of the state to develop and update a strategic plan, which they'll be doing in the coming months, and then to prioritize recommendations for state funding among the types of programs that you've become accustomed to, as well as the new ones that just passed in the budget. So we expect, I think next week, the round 11 will be announced. It's tentatively scheduled to open on May 10th. It will include almost all of the programs you're used to seeing, things like the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, the Market New York program, the ESD Grants program, as well as programs with other agencies like DEC and NYSERDA and DOT and various other types of infrastructure programs that particularly governments might take advantage of. So the best way to stay informed about that when it comes out, obviously staying plugged into Laura and the chamber will help keep you informed, but you can also sign up directly for notifications using the email at the bottom of this slide or the website, where you can always go and see information about the regional council and what's offered and how to access the application portal or anything related with it. And that email is also directly into my office, so if you have specific questions about any programs you see or any projects that you might think would be worthy of funding, we're here to help you answer those questions and try to help you get funding for the things in your community that you want to see happen. So that's kind of the sort of big picture of where we are. You can see a lot is about to happen. Obviously, things are going in a very good direction with the pandemic. We're well on our way, even though we won't get all the way to having everyone vaccinated as quickly as we'd like. We have the most vulnerable, most at-risk people have had an opportunity to get the vaccine. We're on our way to be able to do things a lot more frequently, safely, and with the larger numbers that we're all hoping to be able to do in most settings, especially this summer and outdoors. So I'll conclude this. We can talk about anything I covered or anything I didn't, and I'll do my best to answer it or get you information after the fact. So I am going to end this and stop sharing. And hopefully we'll be back in presentation mode with Laura.
And we are. Perfect. Great. When technology works out. So thank you so much for this update and for your accessibility now and throughout the entire pandemic. I know that whenever members or the business community here in Kingston County that had questions, you always made yourself available. And so I just want to thank you for that, and thank you for all of your efforts in helping to guide the business community through this unprecedented time. I've just checked.
Our team has done a great job helping be responsive, even though we don't always have answers, because the decisions are, being made by the governor's office, the Department of Health. We are providing input. The regional control room has been a really big factor, and your Board of Supervisors chair and county manager have been directly participating in that for almost a year now. So we try to funnel the information and the questions and the issues as quickly as possible.
Thank you for that. So I don't see anything in the general Q&A. So when we come out of present mode, Vinny will be seated alongside at a two-top table. So if you want to pop in and have some brief conversations with him, you have, again, freedom of movement. All you need to do is see an open seat, and that will enable you to pop in and have a conversation with folks.
Laura, I'm happy to take questions. Can people not ask questions that everyone can hear? Are they only able to ask one-on-one questions?
They can if you sit at a larger table. If you go to a table that has an open seat, there will be more than one person there. But yes, feel free to pop into a table just like you would if we were at an event in person.
Okay.
All right. Very good. We will come out of present mode and we'll be back in the main floor. Thank you, Vinny.
Thank you.